and have a really positive impact wherever it's been measured and across a whole range of different stuff. So, as to why caffeine's one part of it, I think the fact that coffee contains a surprising amount of fiber is another one, or the quantity of polyphenols in there. If you're interested in the gut microbiome, like coffee seems to be really good for that. And I think we know more and more the microbiome, Tim Spector has taught us all the importance of that it impacts us in so many different ways. So on almost any front, if you've researched, is coffee good for, longevity? Yes, you see a reduction in all-cause mortality that correlates to coffee consumption. Is it good for cognitive decline? Yes, you tend to see coffee consumption associated with less cognitive decline in old age or liver function, cancer. All of these things seem to have a positive association with coffee drinking, but if it's messing with your sleep, I don't think it's worth it. That's just me. That's the line for me of like, it's not such an incredible benefit. The significant source of fiber, if you think about it that way, a large cup might be 3 grams of fiber, which doesn't seem like much until you start tracking your fiber intake and you realize, oh, that's a decent contribution for a drink. I think that's the biggest part of it. I don't think caffeine has been shown to be neuroprotective necessarily. So I think people are trying to understand the mechanism more. Caffeine's been studied separately and is much easier to study because you can dose it, you can look at the effects of that. To really do a study on coffee consumption is really hard. You can't really do a randomized controlled trial where you raise people from, say, 15 to 60 years old, you control their diet, exercise, sleep, and you just randomize the coffee consumption, because then you might see something that you could really say coffee is good or bad. We can just look at these large epidemiological studies and say, well, trying to control for diet and exercise and cigarettes and all these other things, it looks like coffee drinkers survive longer or have less issues. And it might just be that healthy people live longer or have less issues. And it might just be that healthy people are just attracted to coffee. We don't really know which way around that is. There's no strong mechanism. But at this point, I'd probably be aligned with Tim on this one, that I think it's primarily going to be the gut.
The fiber point's super interesting because he said to me that we're like, as a society, extremely fiber deficient.
Yes.
I think the number he said that we needed was about 20 grams of fiber a day.
I think so, yeah.
So if coffee's giving us 3 or 4 of those grams, that's almost sort of 25% of our requirement, which is pretty staggering. And I never really thought of coffee as a source of fiber.
Neither did I until he told me. It just didn't cross my mind that this, it's a drink. How, it's not like a thick.
Yeah.
I lived the life of like fiber is miserable cardboardy brown cereal.
Yeah.
That's fiber in my brain, and the idea that this was fiber was inconceivable to me. But then I read the studies, and it was fascinating.
What about mental health? I've always wondered, even things like depression, anxiety, I've always assumed a little bit that coffee, because of the caffeine, is...
Actually, I see it in every country. People's opinions and expectations of coffee have shifted massively.
When I first started drinking coffee, which I think I was quite late to coffee, and I think I'm quite a low-level consumer of coffee, part of the reason I was put off drinking coffee was because it appears that the entirety of society are addicted to it. And it might have this sort of first principle belief that anything that has a significant upside must come with a significant downside.
Sure.
And no one can tell me what the downside was. So I was just very reluctant to engage in an addiction when I can see the upside. I can see people are more focused. They seem to be higher in energy. That's the appearance I have. But the downside was never clear. We are addicted, aren't we?
Do you know, I don't like that word.
Really?
But,
I can imagine.
No, this, it's... it's the world's most popular psychoactive drug. It is the most widely consumed psychoactive drug. Yes, I would say it's absolutely bound itself into society now.
Are we addicted?
Yeah. I mean, addiction's complicated. I'm not an expert on addiction. I would say there's a level of dependency. If you stop drinking caffeine, you will suffer for 24 to 48 hours. It might be a kind of big old headache. It might be something else. So, you will have symptoms if you stop consuming it. But you can stop consuming coffee and then go for years without an urge to consume it again. So I wouldn't say addiction's quite the right word for it. But yeah, we are, I would say, deeply dependent on it.
Have you ever stopped drinking it for a prolonged period of time?
Not for a prolonged period of time. It's pretty hard for me not to sort of consume caffeine doing what I do. Like there's just a need to taste, a need to drink the stuff. I've stopped over periods. I've gotten sick. I've gone a week or 2 without it. But I've changed my attitude to caffeine generally. I'm much more careful around it because I think it is worthy of concern, the amount of caffeine you consume. Like, I'm very pro coffee. I want people to drink and enjoy coffee. But at the same time, I am very nervous to encourage caffeine consumption that might be excessive, because that's definitely not good for you.
Why?
Sleep. Like,
Why?
Sleep. Like, ultimately,
Oh, okay.
anything in this world that interrupts your sleep, perhaps with the exception of children, is probably to be avoided, right? Like, sleep quality for every outcome, be it, body composition, longevity, all the rest of it, like cognition. Sleep's so important. And I feel like we didn't culturally prioritize the sleep the way we are beginning to now. I think more and more people are talking about the importance of sleep. And it's really easy to get into a cycle with caffeine of drinking too much coffee in the day. You have poor quality sleep. You're tired the next day. I'll fix that with more caffeine, which will give you lower quality sleep at night. And that cycle can go on and on and on. I think that's a bad thing. Basically, I would say that's to be avoided. So I'm pro cutting off caffeine early if you suffer with it in any way. And there's enough ways to track your sleep these days. I feel like everything's tracking our sleep. So you can tell if you've had a bad night's sleep. And if you drank coffee late, maybe don't do that anymore, because caffeine has about a 5-hour half-life.
To something. When I think about the way we live our lives in society, we literally, many people will have 3 or 4 cups of coffee a day. Some people even more. Some people will just drink coffee all the way through the day, throughout work, and then have one on their way home from work as well. And I look at that objectively and go, that's insanity. That this sort of the entire Western population is just like caffeinating themselves just to function. And then you hear phrases like, I can't function. I've not had my coffee yet. And I just go, this is, but I don't know enough about coffee to understand if that's just, maybe there is a free lunch as it relates to coffee, or maybe sleep is the only.
I think sleep's the primary concern. If you're not suffering any issues with sleep from your coffee consumption, then, if you look at the science, and I'm not a scientist. I like to read the research papers, but I'm not doing the research. But on almost every front, coffee seems to be healthy and have a really positive impact. It's not such an incredible benefit that is worth the loss of sleep quality.
Yeah, sleep has become just the most sort of the biggest obsession in my life over the last year.
I think for all of us. I think it's just, if you pay attention to this stuff, you can't help but begin to obsess over it. I hope healthily.
Yeah. So to avoid the impact of coffee impacting our sleep, you think the best thing to do is, because I've just not been drinking coffee after like 1 p.m.
Great.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty good way to go. I think decaf is still a good option. I think people are kind of really negative about decaf because we have this caffeine first association with coffee. A lot of people are like, why would I drink decaf? What's the point? You see a lot of death before decaf or whatever. But I think decaf can be really tasty, which is good. Like, it's a nice, delicious hot drink. And also, there's a little bit less of the downside if you are concerned about caffeine.
I'm so you and Tim Spector are the two people that have made the case. I think the first time I spoke to Tim Spector about coffee, he was a little bit on the fence as to whether it was healthy or not. He came back a second time, and I think there's been
our half-life. So, even 10 hours after you drank a cup of coffee, there's still a decent amount floating around in your system, enough that might, delay onset of sleep or reduce the quality of your sleep.
Isn't it bonkers that people offer you an espresso after dinner in restaurants?
I don't get it. For some people, they find it very calming and they really enjoy it. They love it. They have no issue sleeping. I cannot touch caffeine after like 3 p.m. I have like a hard cutoff and I'm done. But I find there's the idea that it's a digestive aid. I'm not sure that's super well evidenced, to be honest, having looked into it anyway. But if people enjoy it, I'm not going to get in the way of it. But and some people sleep like a baby afterwards. I'm always amazed by those people who are like, I have coffee, I go to sleep. And you're like, how? And there's big genetic differences. And I think we're starting to see those, and you can get genetic tests done that will give you an idea of your caffeine metabolizer kind of rate. Are you slow? Are you fast? But it's one of those weird things where out for a month, it'll suck for a few days, but you may see benefits or you may not. But
another sort of complicated, tenuous link has been made towards cancer with coffee.
Most of the meta studies now seem to come down on, for almost every cancer, there's a lower incidence associated with coffee consumption. That's not universal. Some studies have found differently. Again, they're just really hard studies to do effectively, I think. I think that's the challenge of it. I have certainly not seen anything that makes me concerned about drinking coffee. from that perspective anyway. I think there's whatever impact it may have, I think would be pretty minor compared to something like cigarettes. And I remember, I think you said on the internet some time ago, you think in 10 or 20 years time, people will see coffee consumption the way they see cigarette consumption.
Yeah, I did. I remember saying that 2 years ago.
Yeah. And I think that to some extent, there's something in that. I think we are getting more thoughtful about caffeine.
Decaf movement. There's now, because of neurodiversity and anxiety concerns, there's this jitter-free, crash-free caffeine movement emerging in things like matcha and etc. So, is decaf? Are you seeing a rise in people choosing decaf? And
the great frustration of decaf is that decaf drinkers are typically very poorly served by the coffee industry.
Okay.
For a bunch of reasons, coffee shop owners tend not to invest in decaf. A lot of coffee roasting companies don't really care about decaf, despite the fact that decaf drinkers are the ones who are drinking it just for the taste. They are the purest coffee consumer, actually, because they just want the flavor. They don't even want the caffeine, just the flavor.
Madness.
So, it's always been an important thing for me over the years that decaf be good. But yeah, I'd love to see more decaf consumption going on. I think decaf can be really delicious and good if it's done properly all the way through, from sort of farm to cup. But it's not as available as it should be to most people, which kind of hurts me.
What about Alzheimer's? Randomly, something I've got increasingly more